work is still very much a grind. It's not let's all go and play ping pong all day and drink kombucha on tap. There's still very much hiking the ball, slamming to the line and hoping for breakthrough, but we need to have some alternatives so we can step back, be a little bit more strategic, and create these beautiful environments to help people truly unleash their best work.
Welcome to the L&D Podcast with your host, Nick Day of JGA Recruitment, specialist HR recruiters. This podcast is sponsored by Think Learning, specialists in learning and performance technologies. Visit thinklearning.com to find out more.
Hello and welcome to the HR L&D Podcast. My name is Nick Day and I'm from James Gray Associates, specialist HR recruiters. And today on the podcast, I am delighted and excited to be joined by Josh Schneider. Now, I came across Josh after he recently published his latest book, 5 Days to Your Best Work Yet, a human-like approach to better work. Now, essentially, this book tackles the strategies we can all use to help us find meaning in our daily lives, while at the same time unlocking new levels of performance. Josh is a sought-after keynote speaker, so I'm hugely happy to have him on this podcast to catch a little bit of his time today. And he actually recently delivered a superb talk on employee engagement and change management that really resonated with me. And I know it's going to resonate with you, my listeners, as well. At a high level, Josh is a bit of an expert on all aspects of human approaches to work. So I subsequently got in touch with Josh, and following a very productive call, we decided to record this HR L&D podcast so that I could have the opportunity of bringing his expertise to your inquisitive ears. So without further ado, welcome Josh to the HR L&D podcast. How are you feeling today?
Nick, I'm doing well. Got 6 hours of uninterrupted sleep with a newborn. So, I'm on top of the world.
Fantastic. For those not that know, me and Josh tried to record this about a week or so ago, but he was expecting the delivery of his latest addition to his family. So hence the comment on sleep. We're getting 6 hours. That sounds like a pretty good night's sleep when you've got a newborn on the way, just arrived. So that's fantastic. But so what I would like to do, because I've done my research into yourself, Josh, I've listened to a number of your talks, but a lot of listeners may not be as familiar.
L&D Podcast Discovery, questions to set the scene.
So I just wondered if you could kick us off with telling us a little bit about your journey to date that essentially led you to joining me on this podcast. Where did it all start?
It all started, the date was October 1st, and I was walking into my first day as an auditor at a CPA firm. And by 9:23 a.m., I thought something is wrong with me. I walked into this job, and over the next couple of years, I saw how unhappy many people were. A lot of people said, "Josh, I'm living the dream." And I'm thinking, doesn't sound like you're living the dream. And I'm glad I stayed though, because by staying, I had the time to read about 100 books on self-help leadership during that season. And it just sparked something in me that I think work should be enjoyable and I think work should be fun. And I was too naive to know it was a bigger problem than me, but that's really how I got started and still what makes me go every day.
Okay, fantastic. And in terms of your career journey then, obviously you started then October the 1st with the CPA. Can you tell listeners about your career journey to date in terms of some of the roles that you've had and some of your experiences in terms of the demographic or the kind of people that you've been speaking to, particularly in relation to your keynote speaking exercises and obviously your books and so on?
Yeah, absolutely. After that time, went into the project management world and fell in love with people, realizing how I treated my team impacted how they showed up every day. And that just sparked me into this. And so, gosh, I think going on 10 years now, doing what I do, waking up every day. And really my main audiences focus around HR leadership, financial institutions. But then, last year I did for here, it's palliative care and hospice. So people who are coming together to learn more about techniques and ideas on how to better serve their clients who are close to passing away, but I've got all these incredible leaders in the room. And like you said, the book, Human-Like Approach to Better Work, what we're seeing in the research is that everybody is a human, and looking at human nature and really trying to unlock how can human nature and work come together.
Fantastic. And one thing that I think really comes across strongly in your book is, and I'm going to try and put you on the spot a little bit here, Josh, but is your passion for storytelling. And I wondered if you could provide us with a little bit of a story-based walkthrough of your latest book. You mentioned there, to reiterate the title, it's 5 Days to Your Best Work Yet, a human-like approach to better work. But is there a story within that book you can perhaps give us a little bit of a passage of, or just talk us through so listeners get a feel for your storytelling style?
Yeah, for one, I mean, who doesn't want to hear a story?
Sure.
But it also helps because you come in, you speak to somebody, or somebody listens to this podcast and they get a great spark or a great idea. And then they're in that meeting 6 weeks later. And, what gives them some weight? What gives the brain an anchor to hold on? And so a lot of every keynote, I start out opening with a story. And right now, the one that's kind of intriguing me the most, and I talk about in the book, is this idea of back in 1906, the game of football, of American football, was actually about to be canceled. And the reason was it had become so brutal. 22 players had died as a result of playing the game. 150 had broken limbs or were injured in such a way that it was going to impact their life in a negative way. And they actually said, we should just cancel the game. And instead of that, they decided to come up with some new rules. One of those was something called the forward pass, which now we know of as the quarterback. But back then it was foreign.
Sure.
And how you played the game was you hiked the ball, you slammed into the line, and you hoped for breakthrough. And this led to boring games, 2-4, which I'm off the record, I'm a Manchester United fan since the Eric Cantona days.
Yeah.
I mean, over here, we didn't have a lot of soccer to be able to watch on the telly, but way, way, way back as a little boy, when he flipped his collar up, I'm like, that's who I love.
Yeah, he was cool. He was very, very cool.
But in American football, I mean, the scores are higher. And so back then, this hike the ball, slam into the line, and hope for breakthrough mentality was boring to watch. And as I'm reading about this one day, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is very much like how people show up to work every day. They're hiking the ball, they're going through the motions. And back in 1906, when the new season kicked off with all of these new rules, none of the teams played by the new rule. None of the teams took advantage, except for one little school, St. Louis University. It was about halftime, and Coach Eddie and his 2-star players, they said, let's do this. We see a possibility for how something can be better. And they ended up going on winning that game. They actually finished the season undefeated and outscored their opponents by over 20-1.
Wow.
And so I mean, utter dominant. I wonder, what would it be like to have been playing against them? You're seeing this other team doing this incredible new play, this incredible new possibility, yet your coach is saying, keep going back out there and doing what I told you to do. Can we try that cool thing? And I think that relays into culture, that relays into leadership. It relays into new generations that have different preferences. And so I think that is such a beautiful setup to what are some new rules? What are some new ways that human nature, that our employee brain is showing up saying, I want to win. How can I do it?
Fantastic. It also creates some great imagery of, we've all felt at one time in our lives that we were just hitting our heads against a brick wall, whether that's a defensive line brick wall or something else. When you take your mind off and think about it in a different way, pick your head up and think about a problem strategically, suddenly you find a new route to success. And I think that's a really interesting story that was certainly creating images for me in my head about, as I say, hitting your head against a brick wall and finding suddenly there's a new solution that you'd never considered before. Fantastic. What a great start.
Having options, because work is still very much a grind. It's not all go and play ping pong all day and drink kombucha on tap. There's still very much hiking the ball, slamming into the line and hoping for breakthrough, but we need to have some alternatives so we can step back, be a little bit more strategic, and create these beautiful environments to help people truly unleash their best work.
Fabulous. Well, listen, we're going to go into a little bit more detail about some of the strategies and insights that you're going to give our listeners about what, techniques and things that people can utilize to I guess, improve their engagement and their working practices. Before we do, I would just like to break quickly to say I'm really delighted that Josh has made 5 copies of his latest book, 5 Days to Your Best Work Yet, A Human-Like Approach to Better Work, available to us, the HR L&D podcast, to give away to you, our lovely listeners. So for your chance to get your hands on a copy, all you need to do is listen to this podcast and answer the following question. As a little tip, the answer to this will, of course, be a little bit later on. So the question for the book giveaway is, if Josh had one superpower, what would it be? Once you've heard the answer later on in this podcast, please email your answers directly to myself at nick@jgarecruitment.com to enter. And we'll be delighted to give away 5 free copies of his latest book, 5 Days to Your Best Work Yet, A Human-Like Approach to Better Work. Right, let's get into some real detail now. So back to the podcast. Josh, one thing I know that you're really, really keen on doing is helping organizations make work better. So from following your talks and from reading parts of your book, you talk a lot about believing that now is the time that businesses and people should be disrupting work as usual and playing by new rules of engagement, because you believe that human potential has never been more ready for new strategies and new insights on how we can win in the new business economy. So with that in mind, I wondered if you could tell us a little bit more about this, and are there any actionable steps or new approaches that our listeners can take away straight from listening to this podcast that perhaps you could recommend?
Absolutely. And I would say I feel like great leaders in many organizations across this globe this is one of the greatest questions that they're trying to go after every day. And many different cultures that I bump into find incredible. Most recently, it was a roofing company, and they go around and put roofs on, and he has found a way to create and empower men and women in his organization. And you have a roofing company with incredible culture that is finding a way to tap into the potential of their human beings. And, I think the one thing that I'm finding resonates the most and probably solves the most amount of problems with one action is this idea. I call it the tingly feeling.
Okay.
And back at the CPA firm, coworker Jen and I were out at a client. It's her and it's me. And we're working on these case files. And all of a sudden she looks up at me and she goes, "Josh, I've got a tingly feeling." Now I'm single at the time, so I think this is good for me. And then I realize the rest of the words that she says. She goes, "Because the numbers match." And I'm like, "What?" She goes, "I've got a tingly feeling because the numbers match." And the first thought I had was, I get so ticked off, so upset when I do 3 days or 3 weeks worth of work and the numbers match, because for me, who I am, I feel like I wasted all of this time and we now have no new information other than the numbers did match.
Sure.
And at the time, I kind of brushed it off. But as I moved forward and really started to establish and build out the institute and become more research focused to support the content, it dawned on me this experience. And I thought, oh my gosh, in a environment or a career that most people would look at and say, boring, you don't get any excitement. Jen, my coworker Jen, found this thing that truly turned her on.
Great. Fantastic. So, I mean, in many of your talks, you're tasked with the project of helping businesses and individuals sort of increase what you would say is performance, energy, and happiness. Obviously, that tingling feeling kind of, I guess, resonates with all of those things. What would be the process that you would follow to achieve that for your clients? How would you get them to increase their performance, energy, and happiness, and I guess achieve that tingly feel?
Well, I think that the energy and the engagement and the performance come as a result of that tingly feeling. So when we started to look at what happens in the brain, or what happened in Jen's brain when those numbers matched, her body, her brain released dopamine, serotonin, and oxytocin, flooded it into her system. And as a result of that, when we have a beer after work, dopamine is released into our system. When we open that special bottle of wine, dopamine is released into our system. And that's where we start to associate these feel-good chemicals with having a good time. And so I've started to say, how can we create an environment at work that starts to release dopamine into our system? And I think if we can do that, we're now trying to find something that we can control. I was with a group a couple months ago, and the gentleman was showing me something on his computer, and we're looking at this spreadsheet, and he goes, "Josh, the spreadsheet tells a story." and I looked at him and I said, "Excuse me?" He's like, "No, look at it. The spreadsheet tells a story." And I love that moment, because once again, something that could be as benign as a spreadsheet, I do believe that every human being has this moment. Sometimes we look at things like purpose and what are your passions? And I've found that those questions are they're so difficult to nail down, especially you're an HR leader and you really care about your people. You may truly, genuinely, in your heart of hearts, want to help your culture or your people establish purpose, but that's a big question. And so I started to say, can we help somebody find out what that tingly feeling is, the part of their work that when they do it, they're so engaged, they're so turned on. And here's the crazy thing, Nick, we have seen that this tingly feeling happens about 4 to 5% of a work week.
Wow. Okay. So very, very small time.
Very little. And with the wrong focus, all of a sudden we're focusing on all of those other tasks. So for example, for me, right, keynote speaking is my absolute, when I am doing that, that is tingly feeling. When I'm on stage in front of hundreds of leaders, whatever the environment, I am on fire. However, when I come off that stage, I've got emails to respond to. I've got sales phone calls to get onto. I've got pre-keynote sessions where we're going to dive deep. I've got research. I've got bookkeeping. I've got to talk with my team. We're working on research. I've got all of these other tasks that, some of them are okay and some of them are just downright awful. But I know that I've got this 4%, this 5% of my work week. And if I give that my focus and my attention, it starts to drive everything else. And I think the things that truly matter, engagement, happiness, energy that you had mentioned.
So for someone who, is listening to this now, perhaps, for me, certainly in the past, when that switch has been turned and I decide I'm ready for something new, obviously we come across these individuals all the time in a recruitment environment who, suddenly people say, look, I need to change jobs. I find often that once that switch has been turned, it's very difficult to switch it back, very difficult to get, or certainly it was for me, to get my engagement back when I've made that decision that actually I've had enough, or I'm no longer happy in this job or in this role that I'm doing. What would be your process, or how do you go about establishing what that tingly feeling is right from the outset? You've got someone who perhaps is lacking in engagement, or just doesn't know how to get that tingly feeling. What would be your process of establishing what that is, and how would you help them find it?
So two things. One is, I think oftentimes in a very quick series of conversations or questions, you can kind of get to the heart of it. What was the best part about your day? Oh, I hated my day. Okay, well, let's look at last week. What was the best part of your week? Well, I got to do this. Okay, what about this did you enjoy? Well, I did this. And, what problem did you find, or what opportunity? Within 5 minutes, if you're able to look someone eye to eye, you can usually get to, not all jobs are 100% evil. Absolutely not.
Sure.
But it takes some time. We may not always have that time. And so part of what we've started to do is put together, so the tingly feeling, cute, funny name, maybe make some people already stop listening. But we took this idea of a compass, because if you and I are out in the woods and we're lost, if we pull out that compass, at least we know how to make a correction to get to where we need to go, right?
Sure.
However, at work, like you said, I've made up my mind. And then you say, well, what don't you love? And usually it comes down to what I've seen is I don't love my leadership, or I don't love the amount of money that I'm making. And so that leaves us very little control. We've put in what we call 8 true north elements. And what these elements measure, or kind of what is going on in the back end, what is going on, if you will, inside of the employee brain. Couple of those that I talk about in the book. One is this idea of pace. So the pace of work.
Sure.
Maybe you are in a role that's very steady, very consistent. And all of a sudden, these projects swell up that require you to have a more frenetic, excitable pace. You wake up one day, 2 months into those projects, and you call Nick because you're like, I got to get out.
Yeah, your breaking point.
Yes. And you know what? Maybe you loved the organization. You loved the mission. You loved your job. But now 2 months later, you find yourself in this deep, dark hole and you have no idea why. And so we have this assessment that allows you to get some clarity on what are some of your true north elements. Another one of them is problems. I personally love solving big problems. I love when I come into an organization and everyone's looking around the table saying, how are we going to do this? I have no idea. Because to me, if we're in the deep end of the pool, does it matter if we're 10 feet under or 1 inch under? Like if we're underwater, we're underwater. So let's jump in. Where other people, same scenario, right? All of a sudden they start having to deal with problems every day. They don't want to deal with problems. They wake up, I don't think I love my job anymore. Or I hate my job. And with working through these true north elements, it allows you to get some clarity and say, wow, that's what's going on, or gives you more context for your day. So that way you can maybe make a decision that will allow you to show up differently, or at least understand.
Sure. No, I like that. And I'm personally, I know people learn in different ways, but I'm very much a visual learner. So for me, I like the compass analogy, because the thing with a compass, it doesn't just allow you to go forward, but it also allows you to find your way back. And if I was enjoying a job, I've never had that ability to be able to find my way back before. I've always gone towards north and made a change. But actually, with the right coaching, with the right individual, I'm sure had they focused on those things at that time, I could have probably found my way back as well. And I love the image that creates for me. I also love the image you mentioned of the spreadsheet creating a story, and it just gave me an image of the Matrix. Where these numbers kind of jump out and suddenly you can see the picture, but only some people can see it. Fantastic. Well, listen, what we're going to do in the second part of this podcast, we're going to delve a little bit deeper into the book. And obviously, you've written a couple of books. We're going to talk about some of the other books you've written as well, and what they can tell us and what they can teach us. So before we do, I just want to break quickly just to find out a little bit more about yourself, Josh.
Time to find out more about you.
So very quickly, how would your friends describe you?
Oh, well, I would say they think I'm a little bit different. When I was at the CPA firm, I had one of the partners. He's like, Josh, you see the world differently than everybody else. And he was also one of the partners that encouraged me to take a different step in my career.
Okay. And
I think I've always, I don't know if it was being an only child for 14 years of my life or what, but, I'm definitely, I see the world differently. And they would also say that I'm very particular about my glassware. My coffee mugs, I like certain style. For wine glasses, I like a certain style. For water cups, I like a certain style of cup.
Interesting.
So not all fancy, but I'm particular.
Okay. Well, I think in the UK we'd call that quirky. But I like that. What is your proudest achievement to date?
I mean, I think the default answer out of just the status of my heart and why I do what I do is my family, my wife, who said yes before she realized what she was getting into. And now 3 kids and helping raise them. is truly an honor. For me personally, having this idea that I could help. I think many people wake up saying, I want to make the world a better place. They don't always know how. And so 7, 8, 9, 10 years ago, whatever it was, when I embarked on what I would say this journey of arriving where I'm at now, and being able to provide for my family and have resources to commission research, to build a team, to get to, sometimes I just have to wake up and just be so grateful for the problems that I get to think about on a daily basis. Like that is just, it has been a hard journey, and it is not done yet, but I feel blessed to have the heart that cares about the problems that I do.
Great. Well, what a great place to be. I think the next question I've got is going to be maybe a tougher one, because I'm speaking to someone who clearly motivates a number of people in the world, certainly motivates businesses to work better. So who is it that motivates you, and why?
Kind of two ends of it. There was a quote I saw years ago by Leonardo da Vinci that said something along the lines of, I've offended God and mankind because my work did not reach the quality that it could have. And that was always so fascinating to me, because it's like, you look at his notebooks, you see what he has accomplished, the visions that he had. And I read deeper and said, a man with great vision without a degree of discipline and strategy and focus behind him is going to leave his life feeling this way. And so that has really sparked me to I am a big thinker. I love to float from one thing to the next, but over the last 5 years, trying to bring discipline and focus. So that, that side of motivation. And then there's the other side of what motivates me. I have this picture in my mind. I'm sitting in Starbucks. I'm having a cup of coffee. I see a man come into the parking lot. He gets out of his minivan. He kind of slumps his way into the coffee shop, gets his coffee, doesn't really crack a smile the whole time, gets back out to his minivan and pulls away. And I just look at that human being, and I think that man is doing everything possible for his family, and he's just burnt out. He's frustrated. Maybe he's not getting the results that he wants. The man's driving a minivan for his family. and whatever I could do in my life to help an individual like that with a huge heart who wants to go to work and win, if I could give him some strategies, and I will hold that picture for the rest of my life.
No, that's a great example. This makes me think about something that I read on your website. I think it was actually related to the tingly feeling section, which I'll put a link to in the episode notes. But you talk a lot about where for some work can be filled with passion, excitement, and so on, but it can then often become a job that's just about obligation, and it's just about getting through. And it's that point that sometimes you learn, you become to hate it. But you talk about something called hypoxia. You're probably better explaining it than I am, but I know that you talk about how, where meaningful work kind of acts as like oxygen to the employee brain. Mm-hmm. And without that, we start to shut down. I think that's probably quite relevant to what you just mentioned. I don't know if might be better for you to explain it better than I can, or I can quickly jump to your website and have a look. But I know that you talk about something called hypoxia, which, is where we need, we use the employee brain. I think you reference it like oxygen, but perhaps you could expand on it.
Yeah, it's, that I think is exactly it. Hypoxia is when the human brain becomes deprived of oxygen. It begins to shut down. After about 3 to 4 minutes, you're making very poor decisions. Like, you don't know what a square, that kid's toy, a square peg goes into a square hole. You can't figure that out. And very shortly after, you can actually start to die and lose brain cells. And so, in the human environment, it's very dangerous. Hypoxia is what happens when we don't have oxygen. In the employee brain, I think if you go too long without meaningful work, too long without sparks of innovation, excitement, engagement for who you can become, that your employee brain starts to shut down. And in my keynotes, I show this video of somebody in an oxygen chamber, and they're like saying to the individual in the chamber who was going through this exercise of feeling what it was like to have oxygen deprivation. They're saying, put your mask back on, put your mask back on, put your mask back on. And he's got this grin on his face staring back at them. And they're like, put your mask on. And they had to have somebody else come over and put it on. And they're like, you would have died if it wasn't for it. Now, granted, it was, he was not that close to dying because it was a controlled environment, but once you get into it and your employee brain starts to get those feelings, you shut off and you may desire something more, but how you get to the other side becomes so hard without, I think, some clear strategies.
Sure. So for yourself, when you were younger, before you became author and keynote speaker as you are now on all aspects of employee engagement and work and performance, what did you want to be when you were a child?
As boring as it might sound, I always had this vision of wearing a suit and walking into tall buildings.
Oh wow! Okay.
And it's funny because it does not matter how many times I've been to New York City. I look like a tourist. Like my chin is pointing straight up towards the sun, and I'm walking. Like I've always been fascinated with big cities and tall buildings, and well, I don't always wear a suit every day, but I get to go into tall buildings. Although convention centers are not always tall,
but you've achieved your aim as a child, which is great. Well, for those listening and really keen to find out, because they're keen to get a hand on a copy of your latest book, I have to ask you this last question before we jump back into the depth of the interview. If you could be given any superpower, Josh, what would it be and why?
So hard I need the genie so I can pick three, but I feel like being able to fly very fast would be the ultimate luxury. I'm obsessed with time. And I don't focus a lot on my management of my tasks, but I'm thinking in time, how do I get to my family? How do I reach more people? So if I could be sitting across the desk from you right now and then be back over here in the middle of the States today, like that would be worthwhile. And also to leap from tall building to tall building, like what would that even feel like? You want to talk about dopamine? That would be some dopamine.
Yeah, for sure. Well, listen, for the sake of the book, if I narrow it down, you've got a choice of flight, you've got a choice of, what would that be, like time travel, I guess, or the ability to leap from buildings. Where are we going to lay your hat on?
Did I slip three in there? It's got to be flying. Flying, bar none, would have to be the best.
Excellent stuff. Well, you heard it here first. So drop me an email, nick@jgrecruitment.com, with that answer, and be in with an opportunity of winning one of 5 copies of his latest book, 5 Days to Your Best Work Yet, a human-like approach to better work. Well, look, let's go to a quick advert break, and we're going to jump into some questions all about the book.
Engage, learn, perform with Think Learning, specialists in learning and performance technologies. We're experts in solving the challenges of targeting, tracking, training in regulated environments. We have developed the Totara platform to provide a cost-effective, organisation-wide talent solution that can help you to provide a safer and better place to work. Customisable workflows promotes engagement through onboarding and induction, whilst an intuitive user interface helps drive ongoing engagement with learning. Bespoke workflows for performance appraisal and integration to payroll and recruitment systems transform Totara into a powerful and holistic talent platform. You'll find us to be responsive, collaborative and solution-focused. Visit thinklearning.com for more information. The L&D Podcast. Final questions to help listeners engage, learn and perform.
So, first question, Josh. Now, before we jump into your latest book, I know that the first book you actually released is called Generation Next Level. It calls the next generation of leaders to play to their strengths and do work that matters. Can you tell us a little bit more about that first book?
Yeah, I had a mentor at the time, John Maxwell, who has written over 90 leadership books. And he had said, your first book is going to suck, so you might as well get it out of the way. And so that was my guiding light of, I should write a book and get the first one out of the way. But the heart of that book was really coming out of that season of being at the CPA firm and starting to do work that I loved and was engaging. And so I came up with these 12 laws, these 12 principles that if somebody who has maybe no direction, or somebody who is saying, hey, what am I working for, can walk through this book and get some clarity. Definitely, geared towards maybe a younger generation, but every once in a while I pick it up and I start to read some of the stuff in it. And then I think, Josh, you knew this 7 years ago? Why aren't you talking about this now? That was good. So although it was the first one, I'm so glad to have captured the raw emotion of that season of life and really deliver it to somebody who's finishing their studies, somebody who's fresh into their career, and really give them some juice for how to kind of step up and really lean into who they can become.
Excellent. Fantastic. And these books, by the way, are available on Josh's website, which is joshschneider.com. And I will put a link in the episode notes for those interested in finding out a little bit more. If you want to go straight to the heart of all the different publications that Josh has been involved in, I'll make sure those links are available. Now, also, Josh, to increase the impact of the work that you do, you also founded the Millennial and Employee Engagement Institute, which I think is about curating and developing research to help unlock people performance, which clearly is something you're very passionate about. I therefore wondered if you would be able to provide us with some of your key strategies for unlocking leadership potential.
Yeah, I think the whole idea with the Institute was to start to become more research focused, because I love stories. I love big examples, but it was like, how do we also tie in to truly giving something that has some background to it? And there's so much incredible research out there that I said, we need to help distill this down and bring it to companies and bring it to leaders. And so in terms of the strategies of how to truly develop being a leader, I think it depends on the culture and the environment. But I do believe that each and every manager, each and every leader has the opportunity to lead from their heart. And that doesn't mean that you don't get upset. I mean, think about those that are closest to you. I think about my wife, Jenna. Sometimes she's the one that gets the most amount of passion out of me, and sometimes that passion is not always positive.
Sure.
And so just because your heart is full for your people, it doesn't mean that you're not correcting them or that you're not helping them. But I think foremost, I have to always ask myself, if I'm frustrated with somebody, am I going to go to them out of my mind's frustration, or am I going to lead with my heart and lead with love almost first, as silly as it sounds? And then secondly, the other thing that I have seen starting to get an incredible amount of traction is a couple of years ago, I was doing some work with Chick-fil-A, which in the States is an incredible organization that makes chicken sandwiches. And their culture, they care about their people. For every new franchise or new location that opens up, they have almost 10,000 people apply to be the franchise owner for that location. So what they do is incredible. And so there was a speaker they brought in at their conference who talked about this idea of creating an alliance. And in a fast food culture, you have incredible turnover. And so how do you fight the turnover? One is, having a good culture, whatever. But one of the things that I've started to take from my experience with them, where their turnover was way lower than the industry average, was a lot of the leaders implemented this idea of the alliance, of a contract, meaning, Nick, you as my leader come to me and you say, Josh, I need this, this, and this from you.
Sure.
And I need this, this, and this from you for the next, let's say 12 months. If you can begin to do those things, do these things, I can really see where you can grow. I can really see where you can step into the next level. in return for you doing these things for me, what are some things that I can help you get? What are some opportunities that I can help you get? And having a very frank conversation where maybe somebody says, hey, I don't think I want to stay at this organization anymore. And instead of pushing them out the door or freaking, it's a matter of, okay, would a 6-month timeline or a 12-month timeline to that be something that's reasonable? You can help me accomplish these things, and I can help you accomplish where you need to go next. And it just starts to change the conversation so much. And I mean, I feel like with leadership principles, we can just keep going down and down and down. But I think it was Steve Wynn once said, if you can do something for somebody that they cannot do for themselves, then you've hit the bullseye in human relations. And as a leader, as a manager, if I can create this environment where, if, even if at a minimum, I believe in somebody more than they believe in themselves, then I can carry that with me. And I'm going to always come from a basis of health and a basis of love.
No, I love that. And who wouldn't be inspired, or who wouldn't want to work for a leader like that? So what a great way to finish that summary. And I think can't not agree with the heart and the collaboration side of the answers either. I think a fantastic response, and finish with a brilliant quote. So great. On your website, Josh, there's a section on your website where you ask us to imagine a world where we wake up inspired to go to work, we feel valued, we're totally engaged, and we get to use our skills and strengths to solve problems. And yet, you also highlight that right now, at the moment, there's sort of 83% of individuals who are stressed at work, 55% are unsatisfied with their jobs, and 47% are struggling to stay happy. So from your experience, where is this disconnect happening, and how can we turn those statistics on their head to that people are more engaged and they are, starting to live in that imagined world that you've so beautifully created?
Out of the gate, there are incredible companies and organizations that they skew these statistics so hardcore. One of my other favorites is that Gallup found that only 13% of people love their job and are not looking, which is very interesting given, at least I know over here, and I think more globally than ever, the rate of people that have jobs right now, like unemployment is so low, the employment rate is so high.
Yeah, I agree. That's why there's such a war on talent. And but you're right. I mean, I work in recruitment, and for the right opportunity, we call them passive candidates. But most people can have their head turned if the right opportunity exists.
And so it's so fascinating to me. Last year, I came into a recruiting organization and spoke at their annual conference. And in doing the research, it was so fascinating. They're saying we're having trouble getting candidates to move and fill these positions. And to your point, there's this research that's showing so many people are unsatisfied. And so if so many people are unsatisfied, yet so few people seem so incumbent to move, are people entering into a state of comfort, or are they driven by fear? And it's beautiful that our bodies and our brains are engineered to keep us safe. And change and new things is something that absolutely can scare us. And I don't always go back to the beginning of time when we were focused on running away from animals that were trying to eat us and constantly finding food to make sure we didn't starve. But I think we've kind of crossed out of that. And, if we look at the brain chemistry cannot operate in fear and love at the same time. And we're either going to be driven by this sense of fear, and there's leaders out there that get incredible amounts of work out of their people driven by fear. But is there this other side where we can focus on creating dopamine, where we can focus on creating oxytocin? I mean, you want to look at the power of oxytocin. When a woman gives birth, her body produces a 500x boost of oxytocin. So that's how a woman goes from incredible pain to all of a sudden, in a split moment, this blissful moment. And that is from oxytocin. And if we can find ways, and I think that the tingly feeling, and one of the other things that I talk about a lot is focusing on this idea of meiraki. And meiraki is a Greek term that, when translated into English, means the soul, the love of your work. It means the part of you that you actually leave in your work. And, if you think about going to your favorite restaurant and you sit down at the table and the server approaches the table and says, "Hello, my name is Josh. Here's the menus," pulls out their little pad, reads a couple of the specials. "I've got a halibut with some pesto, and I also have a tomahawk bone-in ribeye. Once again, I'm Josh. I'll be back." That server leaves that transaction. And you at the table, you feel probably relatively confident. You feel comfortable. But if this server with some meiraki shows up and he doesn't hand over the menus and he looks you in the eye, he looks the rest of the table in the eye and he says, "Welcome. My name is Josh. I'll be taking care of you tonight. I was just with the chef and he had a couple of additions to the menu that he wanted me to share with you. And foremost is halibut, which was just flown in this afternoon. And he's done it in a little bit of a pesto right onto the grill. Get some sear marks and really lock in the flavor. He's also prepared a citrus vinaigrette, tossing that and some heirloom tomato and arugula. So on the dish, you're going to have this little sweet and salty play, really to kind of open up your palate. Additionally, tonight I have a bone-in ribeye, which was aged at our locker down at the Eastern Market. And in that locker, it's lined with Himalayan salt. If you and I were to go stand in there for 2 minutes and lick our lips, it would remind us of the warm Mediterranean Sea. I mean, and at this point, you're like,
"You're making me hungry
vegan,
right now."
I think I want both.
Yeah.
And I think that when we think about the differences between the two was not radical. The difference was this meiraki, was this love and this passion. And when we can find ways to turn on love and passion for people, to create an environment at work where the little twists, these little sparks, can find ways to show up, I think it truly begins to combat the numbers that we see there.
Sure. I think that's a fantastic. I really enjoyed just listening there. I was just you caught me on your dreaming on your words of good food, but I totally understand the point. I think also, going back to the statistical side of things, I think you talk about a lot of people being, potentially unhappy in their jobs, and I think sometimes, to relate that to the fear aspect that you mentioned, it's very easy to say you're dissatisfied, but it's much harder to vote with your feet by actually making a physical change. I think sometimes it's easy for us all just to vent a little and go, "Oh, this isn't right, and I'm not happy about this." But actually, when it comes down to making a change that could affect the security of your family or your economics or all the other bits and pieces that tie into a career choice, it's a lot harder to make that change. And I do agree, it's fear that very much is holding people back. They just wonder, are they good enough, or can they take this on, and will they be secure? But as you say, if there was a server in this instance that was really pitching the right opportunity at the right time with all, and really made it resonate with them, you might find they're a lot less fearful of making those decisions. No, it was a really, really engaging way of putting it.
And here's the crazy thing. There was a New York Times bestselling book quite a few years ago called The Answer. And in that book, he quotes a study where they found by the time we've turned 18, we've heard "no, you can't" 150,000 times.
Wow.
Which I thought was impossible, but now having 3 little ones, I get it. Like you don't say no just one time, you say them in bunches. And so it creates kind of this negative feel. Don't do that. Watch out. The risk is too big. Be careful. Don't jump off that. Get down. He also found, or this study also found, that the good news though, is we hear "yes, you can" 5,000 times. Now, it took me 5 years to get a 4-year college degree in accounting, so that should have been the clue on the front end. But that's a 30-to-1 negative ratio. A 30-to-1 negative ratio of no being more powerful than yes. The National Science Foundation has found we have roughly 50,000 thoughts a day. I think if you're an above average coffee drinker like I am, it's closer to 70,000. And so we have 70,000 thoughts a day running through our mind that are more negative than positive. And then you couple that with, the report card scenario that some of us talk about, where your child brings home a report card with 3 A's, 2 B's, and a C. Nick, what's the grade that gets the attention?
It's crazy, just those statistics you were just listing, the 30-to-1 yes to no's. Wow.
That's where, for me, a human-like approach, we look at engagement of employees. We call it employee engagement. And I think, at least over here, the amount of money being spent to try and solve employee engagement is making a change, but not a massive change. And so I think we are more connected than ever. Millennials and now Generation Z are more comfortable than ever. You ask a millennial, what do they do before they go to bed? They check their phone. They check their work email. You ask them what's the first thing they do when they wake up? They check their phone. They check their work email. That wasn't something that we talked about 20, 30 years ago.
Sure.
And so, I don't want to navigate down that millennial path with this conversation, but we are in a very fascinating time and of work. And so how do we create these opportunities that allow people to go against the stream of how they've been raised or the thinking that they've been raised in?
Well, interestingly, I mean, your maybe this is a really relevant time to pick this up, but your new book states that obviously something has to change to improve these statistics. And there's something in it that you say that we can experience significant change within just 5 days. So can you tell us a little bit more about what the strategies would be, or what things we could do to start seeing some of these significant changes occur in such a short space of time?
Absolutely. And I think that, especially leaders, we are busier than ever. And so this book was designed to be short. This book was designed to be something you could throw in your bag and not be stressed out because it's taking up room. And the setup is, hey, there's a new set of opportunities here. And day 1 and 2, walk through kind of where you are and where do you want to go. Just establishing some groundwork. And then once we get into days 3, 4, and 5, we start to focus on what are you best at. And so day 3 could truly be kind of that of a strengths conversation. And I think one of the biggest misconceptions on strengths, and Marcus Buckingham, who in some ways I consider to be the father of strengths along with Gallup, he's very passionate about strengths and weaknesses are not about things that you're good at versus things that you're bad at. Strengths and weaknesses are really about things that energize you and give you energy versus a weakness being something that drains your energy. You could probably edit somebody's blog post and you could do a smash up job. But when you're done, if you never have to do that thing again, you're really happy. So it's not always about what you're good at and what you're bad at. And kind of walk through that on day 3. Day 4 truly dives into the tingly feeling and walks through these 8 different true north elements. And then day 5 kind of says, who do you want to be? And I think we are in a culture that is very focused on what are you doing? You run into somebody you haven't seen for a while. Oh, what are you up to? You have a picnic this summer with family who you haven't seen in 2 years. What are you doing? And everyone's so focused on the doing. And I think sometimes we have to detach ourselves from the outcome of what we want or what we're working towards. And we need to focus on our efforts and who we're becoming. And I was
going to say, and if we follow that path, as you say, it's not a huge book. It's easy for people to digest, which is one of the reasons that anyone listening to this, it's well worth picking up a copy. But the fact of the matter is, if we follow your guide within 5 days, we should start to be able to establish what it is that gives us those energizing, tingly feelings, as you put it, if you like, to allow us to I guess, to be more engaged. But you believe that can, if we follow those guidelines within 5 days, we can start to see some real results.
Absolutely. And I kind of see the world in 45 to 60-minute increments. That's how long I'm usually on stage for. And somebody once said, Josh, do you really think you can help somebody's life get better in 45 minutes? What could you possibly, and I believe, yes, do. And I say this at the end of the book, that this book is not the one and only resource. However, this book is designed how I think about a keynote. In 45 minutes with a keynote, I want to come in and I want to open up some new possibilities, a new way of thinking, crack the door that's maybe never been cracked before. And then I want to deliver 2 to 3 rock solid, hard hitting strategies that if you begin to implement, you're going to see a change. And the book to me is it the one and only resource for how to make your life better at work? Heck no. But I believe it's engineered for how busy we are, how distracted we are, and gives what I think are the most important things for right now in 5 days.
Excellent. Fantastic. So, well, listen, we're going to open the L&D Vault in just a moment. And before we finish off this podcast, I've got one last question I'd like to ask you in relation to, I guess, what you're seeing in the marketplace in the moment, Josh. So what was the biggest engagement frustration you have right now? And do you think it should be disrupted if you had the choice?
There's so many problems. One of the questions I love to ask on a pre-keynote call is, if we were to get together in 12 months from now, what has changed as a result of us working together? And I think if I could sum it up, there seems to be a lack of ownership in a lot of people. I think that this year, in my mind, culture was always big, but I've seen people doubling down again, focusing on culture. And, how do you take all of these social changes? How do you take how people are showing up to work with these distractions and truly create something, get them focused around something that can give them ownership? Because so many businesses, I think, want to grow, and they're turning down business because they can't get enough of the good people on board. And so, if I could distill it down to 2 things, it might be ownership, it might be culture, which are really big pieces to tackle. And that's where I've said, if we can go down to the human level and we can start to help every individual find out what their tingly feeling is, and we can turn them on, and this company became somebody that did something for them, now we're moving in a direction.
Fantastic. Well, listen, we're going to open the L&D Vault.
Opening the L&D Vault.
What is the one piece of advice, and you may have just answered this question in your last answer here, Josh, but what is the one piece of advice you would give to someone working as a leader in HR right now?
Yeah, it's got to be, I think, in a 5-minute interaction, can you help somebody find their tingly feeling? Because now we've given them a sense of true north. We've given them a sense of, you do add value. It's not this, HR is so widely varied, whether you're in leadership or whether, you got into HR to help people live a better life. And now you're doing a lot of paperwork and you're frustrated by that, but you still have these moments to truly unlock somebody in a way that brings life to their work. And I think even more importantly, brings life to their home life, their family.
Fantastic. Love that. With the benefit of hindsight, what would be the one career decision that you would change?
I always want to think not go to the CPA firm that I did, but because I went to that CPA firm, I jumped straight into the fire. And so it caused me to head down this path probably much sooner in life, which is a blessing. In terms of like being useful, I would ask people, as you're coming out of school, or even as you're looking at an organization, the organization I went to was very focused around audit. We did very little consulting. We did very little other services than strict audit. And so my path there which prompted me to leave sooner than later, was because I only saw one path towards becoming a partner at a CPA firm, which, by the way, Nick, that was my goal.
Okay.
When I walked in day one, I said, I'm going to be a partner in 10 years. I don't care 100-hour weeks. I don't care what it takes. Like, I'm going to be the guy. And 2 years later, I was out the door. But really thinking about like, okay, do I want to work for this company? If I'm choosing to begin with them, I should think a little bit more long-term. And do they have some cool stuff that I could grow into?
Sure. Well, it sounds like it's as you say, it's a tough one for you to change when it's led you to where you are now. And with that in mind, if we were sat here again a year from now, celebrating what a great year it's been for you, what would you have hoped to have achieved?
Oh, so we are in the process of truly validating and building really strong assessments around the employee brain and the tingly feeling compass.
Okay.
And in theory, we talk about it and it works, but now we're going out and commissioning. I've brought on a research firm to truly go look at this and create something that I think can change people's lives on a mass basis. Wow,
that sounds super, super exciting. Will there be links to that in longer term on your website?
Yes, it'll be probably front and center.
I'll definitely keep my eyes on that. Fantastic.
Free assessment.
Excellent. Last question before we close the L&D Vault for you, Josh. What is the one piece of advice you would give to someone who is embarking right at the start of their career, embarking on a career in HR?
I think remember who you're trying to serve. Remember a couple of years ago, I had a conversation with somebody and they were so excited. They were launching this $2 million LMS, learning management system. And they got it built, developers, everything worked well, everybody's certifications, all the courses got loaded. And then they sent out an email and the large organization had a user rate of less than 1%.
Wow. Okay.
Maybe it was indicative of the culture there, but I think it's never forget who you're trying to serve. A lot of over the last couple of years, I've gotten into a lot more kind of off-center, but change management work on huge software rollouts. And even as something as simple as the job aid for how somebody punches in or records their time or gets their expenses reimbursed, how that job aid is presented and how it helps somebody walk through the process, to me, is an employee engagement tactic. To me, it's showing the human you matter. And I think so many times we get into roles that either, the paperwork or the stress level gets so high, or we start to focus on these big items, a $2 million LMS or a brand new system getting rolled out to everybody. And it's easy to forget about the end user and the human being who shows up to work, who genuinely just wants to get their job done and go home.
Sure. Well, what a fantastic way to finish the podcast. Thank you ever so much, Josh, for joining me today. It's created so many images in my mind to take away. I hope it's done the same for the listeners as well. It's been full of fascinating content in the way that you see the world, and it's great. We've got practitioners like yourself out there trying to improve the world that we work and live in on a daily basis. So I feel absolutely privileged to have you on the podcast today. Of course, I will put all the links to your books, in particular your latest book, which is 5 Days to Your Best Work Yet, Human-Like Approach to Better Work. There'll be a link to that on the episode notes, along with a link to Josh's website, which is joshschneider.com. I should add as well that at that website, you can also access his other books, which one of them is called Generation Next Level, which we touched upon in this podcast. And there's also an engagement guide for managers and leaders there as well as a host of other content, which I absolutely recommend you take a look at. We've got blogs, we've got vlogs, we've got a great graphic and further information about the tingly feeling. And of course, you can contact Josh as well if you're interested in getting involved or getting him involved rather in some keynote speaking for your organization. So please do take a look at that. That's joshschneider.com, and I will put a link in the episode notes. But that leaves us to a close. So thank you ever so much, Josh, for joining us today on the podcast. And I'm very much looking forward to speaking to you all again, you lovely HR and L&D listeners, in a couple of weeks. Thanks again, Josh.
Nick, my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on board.
You've been listening to the L&D Podcast with your host, Nick Day of JGA Recruitment, specialist HR recruiters. This podcast has been sponsored by Think Learning. If you have enjoyed this podcast, please review it, share it and subscribe so you never miss a future episode.